So I think I'll be talking for about an hour or 40 minutes, and there's time for questions as well, during and at the end. So an intro to the festival. Strangeland, Still a Very Common Ground has kind of a geographical focus. So as TULCA usually is, this festival is situated within the context of Galway City. Also let me know if you can't hear me. I'll try and raise my voice. So I kind of began by thinking about Galway's location by the Atlantic Ocean and Galway's history as a maritime trading court. And there are lots of interesting conversations that happen there. Around Irishness and configurations of Irish identity outside of just Celtic identity. Obviously, you can see through the city there's a huge history of trading with the Mediterranean and North Africa. So all of that exists within Galway's own specific history. I also started thinking a lot about maps and ancient maps and cartographic practices. So I guess in the age of discovery, when different states and countries were trying to configure or imagine what existed outside of their territorial lines, a lot of what they came up with were these beautiful, gorgeous ornamental maps, where they tried to sort of maybe imagine or encant places and people that they had never seen before. And in that process, a lot of how what was considered other or strange or outside was often depicted as like really beautiful, interesting, vegetal, human, architectural forms. So I think just thinking about those processes of mapping and thinking about how we might configure what we can't see or who exists otherwise or outside of ourselves, and how that process of imagining can often kind of hint at excitement and possibility. So starting with that sort of geographical focus, the festival is also situated in our current context. And just thinking about a lot of the movement and displacement that's happening, and just I think generally feelings of fragmentation and isolation that result as part of living within capitalism. So a lot of the work that you'll see during the festival and a lot of the artists, their work focuses on these relational practices. So within this space specifically, there's lots of work that depict encounters with specific landscapes or specific architectural forms. I think, okay, that's a good background of the festival. Maybe we can move through work. So we're going to start this way. So when you come in, you see these huge kind of coin-like structures. These works are by artist Seán O'Riordan. They're sort of placed like this, so they feel as if they're in movement or they're in motion. You can tell that they're coins not because of their size, but because of the sort of bridges on the outside. And also the motifs on them. So you can see this one has kind of like, I think, a sort of Pieter frowning mask, but it's also got these stars that might feel familiar from, I guess, the European flag. Seán is an artist who, in their work, have been thinking about these processes of access and entry and different economies to sort of make the world move. So a lot of this work was inspired by these kind of tokens that existed in the 1980s or the 1990s that queer people would share and distribute. And these tokens kind of allowed access into spaces like clubs, bathhouses, bars. And Seán wanted to sort of recreate these kind of little coins. I think something that felt important for them was that whatever they created was something that couldn't be co-opted or distributed like currency, but was actually something that represented sort of power and alternative economies of desire. So these coins are designed to be very huge rather than small, so that they can't be kind of stolen or taken. And they're designed for you to circulate them so that you can think about these processes about currency and value circulating and moving. You can kind of see that the motifs are a bit funny and cheeky. So as I said, they're inspired by queer life. But also, I think part of the work is about the aesthetics of power too. So if you think about a regular coin that you might have, like a British pound, what you'll often see is like a figure of a monarch on the front or the side of the coins. But Seán has used these figures of sort of like chaotic, kind of trickster, cheeky beings. If we move back here, So thinking about currency and circulation, and these objects like passports and documents that determine identity and value and allow entry into specific places. Seán also makes these smaller tokens, so you can see that there's this idea of minting, like creating new versions. And here they're placed on these sort of cardboard structures. I think they sort of imitate those, I'm not sure exactly what they're called. These works are called stillages, and maybe the structures also are. But I guess you would see them maybe in a studio or on the back of a van where anything that is supposed to be stored upright is kind of perched so that it doesn't fall over. And so that's kind of what Seán has tried to do. And they're made out of cardboard, so there's a sense of like fragility or temporariness to them too. And you can kind of see that some of the motifs are similar to the motifs in the coins behind you. And some are a little bit different. Like this one here says cottaging, which is also part of queer culture. So within the work, there's also kind of hints at sort of encrypted and coded queer languages as well, like Polari, which is, I think, a sort of queer secret language from the 80s, used by, I think, mainly gay men. And a lot of Polari comes from Caint, which is traveller language, and it also comes from languages used by people who work in travelling services. So there's this kind of, I guess, encrypted economy motif happening for it. So this work is, these are older works, and this work is a New York commission made specifically for TULCA. Seán was in the space throughout the install and made this work here while we all kind of worked around them. So it is placed here so you can kind of encounter it as you walk through. It looks sort of like a false wall or a threshold. It's supposed to look a bit uncanny and a bit out of place. And its shape kind of encourages you to sort of walk around it and kind of figure out how to maybe enter the space. So the structure is made of cardboard timber. And the idea is that it's easy to make and it's temporary, but it also feels like the other work's quite fragile, like it might fall over at any point. It's got these terracotta panels. So this one says nobody's home, this one says desire. There's a panel on the other side that says open. So it's sort of, these are kind of like panels you would see like flashing outside of a bar, like neon lights. So it gives the impression that you are at the threshold, you're about to enter a bar. But it's also a facade in a way. So there's actually, I guess the signs are also quite ambiguous. So there's no real way to enter. The feeling is that you feel a bit lost as you travel around the wall. And again, it's also pointing at these spaces where, I guess it's pointing at these sort of queer sites, and it is encouraging you as a viewer to think about these spaces where you may not be allowed to enter, or you may not know the codes or the languages that allow entry. And again, I think these crouching figures as well, like you can see there's a man in a suit sort of crawling on the ground, and on the back there's also another suit man crawling on the ground. So there's an idea here that power is being destabilized in some way, access is being denied, or entry is being denied. So these are some large media photographs by an artist called Caoimhín Gaffney. This is a set of 5, and it's called A Concentration of Time. So you can kind of see, similar to Seán's work, you can see, if you want to come up close, feel free to do so. You can kind of see these figures sort of hidden in the forest. Some of the works feel a bit disorienting or upside down or flash photographs, so the forest looks almost a little bit haunted or scary. And there are these fragments of text that are paired, and they sort of tell a story that, I guess to me, hints at like an experience with mushrooms and enchanted forest. So these are part of a wider series of work called All at Once Collapsing Together. So there's quite a lot of photographs, and what you see here is only a selection from the entire series. These are paired together quite intuitively. I think when I was choosing the photographs and choosing how to pair them, I was sort of going off the logic of A Concentration of Time, where an image of a specific landscape is paired with a bit of text. So it feels like a sort of fleeting narrative or a scene from the story. And all of the texts kind of represent these kind of encounters with nature where an unnamed protagonist is describing things that they might see or they might feel, and it hints at the sense of like fragility and fear and climate anxiety. This one is similar as well. You can see a figure crouching out the edge of a sand dune here. Yeah, the narrator in each of these texts has kind of like a queer voice or a queer ideology, and there's sort of queer thought that is surrounded throughout the entire series. I think for Strange Land Still Bear Common Ground, it felt very interesting to have this work written by Caoimhín, because I was thinking quite a lot about, I guess, borders and boundaries and margins and how to unsettle them, or how we think about how we might categorize or differentiate between, like, say, like in Caoimhín's work, humans and nature. But they do a really impressive thing where within these works, nature and humanity is really entangled. The boundaries are very blurred, to the point where it kind of feels frightening. It feels almost like it's making fun of people who perhaps are not able to live in a way where they can kind of be interdependent or entangled. So I think they utilize the sort of climate fear, this feeling of nature kind of like subsuming the self. So these were really interesting works to show. The rest of the collection is really, really beautiful. It was a logistical issue, but it's not here. But Caoimhín is a brilliant artist. I think maybe also thinking about these situated encounters with specific landscapes. So these three pieces are part of one body of work called The Borderlands. So the project was initiated by Welsh artist Mair Hughes. Mair is Welsh from English and had grown up on the border between Wales and England. And she kind of wanted to invite people to explore this idea about heritage and dual identity, Englishness and Welshness. So the project invited four artists, three of which you see here, on walks along the English and Wales border to kind of speak about their experiences and engage with the landscape. So starting here, you can see some pictures by a writer and photographer called Durre Shahwar. Durre is also of dual identity. So Durre is from Wales, lives in England, and has, I think, a Punjabi background or a Pakistani background. Yeah, I think there's something very appealing about Mair's idea to invite other people to have this conversation about Welshness. It felt interesting to also situate that within Ireland, because obviously Wales is its own Celtic country with proximity to England, with an identity that's kind of defined by, and again, it's that proximity to England. Yeah, I think something that maybe strikes me about this as well is a conversation with EVA. So there's quite a lot of work about borders throughout the festival, and there was a workshop by two artists in the Galway Arts Centre, and EVA attended, and from it said something about the border being within. So this process is sort of like being a person from elsewhere, existing within the countryside, especially the English countryside, which is such a contested landscape. I think there's this idea about the countryside being the opposite of cities like London, being places that are completely untouched by like migrants or people who are othered, being this example of pure English identity. And Durre also being a migrant, kind of traversing these landscapes and taking these photographs and creating narratives about her own self and her own identity. Feels also like this process of kind of unfragmenting yourself, situating yourself as a whole within a whole rather than as another person or as a territory. These are, I think if you come closer, you can kind of see that Durre has arranged them, so it feels as if the river is running through each of the photographs, and they are quite beautiful. They're also placed this way so that they can kind of face Mair's work and Emily's work as well. So as you're looking at them, you're also thinking about this small slide here that Mair has created in. Just beginning with this image, it's a chiffon photograph, You can see here, this is Mair's mother in the slate tent. So Mair has been taking these trips across the Offa's Dyke, which is, so a dyke is kind of, I'm sure people know, a dyke is a bit of land that's been raised in order to create a bank to prevent any sort of like flooding over a territory. So Offa's Dyke is a very ancient dyke. It used to be a border work, so the dyke used to kind of cut across England and Wales and mark two different territories. And it still exists today, but actual English and Welsh border has been moved, but the dyke is still there. So you can see in this image, this is Mair's mum in a slate tent that they used to travel the dyke. So this is them on the Welsh side, and they're looking over across to the English side of the border. And I think there's a village up here in the mountains where Mair's family lives. And this photograph kind of, we're supposed to sort of work in the backdrop in this picture. So this is made out of scaffolding, and also the canvas has been dyed by the artist. You can see here there's a little buffet called Offalside Pa. So this is Mair's companion as she walked the dyke along with some of the artists that she invited, and as part of the project the oil lands. So the tent is kind of supposed to represent the feeling of a dyke as well. So it's, I think, quite similar to Seán's work, where maybe from the front it feels as if it's a structure that you can enter, but actually you walk around it and you see it's kind of actually a sort of boundary or barrier. This text is a text in Welsh. It says, "Not from us kings and no kings from us." And I think this is based on a tapestry that existed, or a sign that existed outside a farm where the artist's family grew up. So she sort of remade it and actually radicalized the phrase, need to be anti-monarchy. There is also an audio piece here where you can hear some recordings of a walk. There's also some singing. So Mair has made some oral histories with members of her family, and has taken some sound snippets and created a really beautiful and immersive experience there. This is a little banner on a wooden bell, and this is by another artist decided to be part of the project. What you can see is kind of two little vignettes, so it's two hands sort of playing tug of war over the River Wye, which is another structure that cuts between England and Wales. And I think the river has one of the largest populations of salmon in England. Well, that population is actually really dwindling now because of various ecological issues. But Emily has made this work and a few other ceramic sculptures to go with the work. Speaking of borders, they actually got stopped by customs, so they're not here. But if you visit the festival in a week, it might look a little bit different, and those works might actually be in this space, hopefully. These are medium to large scale handmade textiles made by the artist Jess Zamora-Turner. Jess also lives in Europe, and she lives on the border of Poland and Germany. So this textile, it's lit. It's a really dark space. It was attempted to be lit so that you can view it from here, and you can kind of see the sort of colors in it. You can see the patchwork design. When you view it from the back, it's sort of a bit more niche. But when it's backlit, it's really, it's quite beautiful. So this is called Postomia Blanket. Also another work that is inspired by a river. So this work was actually made in collaboration with the river Postomia. So that river runs between Germany and Poland. Again, two different territories with really contested histories. So Jess has made this by sewing together some used bed sheets, some other salvage material. It has its color because it was soaked in the riverbank. So it picked up quite a lot of sediment, ecological detritus, a bit of sewage. There's also a bit of copper in there. And this work is sort of a monument to the river itself, the river's shifting moods, and all of those shifting ecological material that travels through the river. This work is called Three Sisters. It's really worth coming up close to have a proper look at the textile. So this is also made of salvaged material. There's an antique blouse in there, and they have these little mesh pockets as well. So you can see within these pockets, the artist has sewn in some heirloom seeds of beans, squash, and maize. So Three Sisters is actually a method of planting used in the Americas by indigenous people. And in that method, those three seeds, which are liqueur crops in some parts of the Americas, are planted together. And as they grow, they kind of sustain each other. So this blanket was made to kind of challenge that sort of individualistic monoculture logic that we see in industrial architecture, where one crop is planted by itself. And in that, it sort of spoils the crop, it spoils the soil, and it really negatively impacts biodiversity. So within this work, the artist is attempting to return maize, as well as squash and beans, to their original relational context. You can see, I think something I really love is you can kind of see that the blanket has been stuffed with some untreated wool, and that's sort of falling out of the sides. Part of this is also an altar and archive to collective Indigenous memory. So a lot of displaced Indigenous communities often took their seeds with them. And by taking their seeds, they also took their history, they took their stories, they took their cultural knowledge when they were pushed out of their territories. So this blanket also kind of honors that history. So this work is called Postomia Blanket. You can feel free to travel around it as I'm talking. Something I really like about this is that it also offers another sensorial experience. Like, it has a very strong smell, so you can kind of smell the untreated wool that it's been stuffed with. So if you were wondering what that was, it's artwork. Yeah, so this is really large in scale. Yeah, you kind of see all of it's handmade, so you can see that this is a work that required quite a ton of time and labor. This work was made to honor and named after Pisagua, sorry, not Postomia. So Pisagua is a remote village in Chile. So the village is very small. It's got a population of about 300 people, mostly fishermen. The village forms a sort of, I think, a kind of prison, people will say, because it's trapped right in the middle of the desert and the sea. So it's also got a really horrible history. During Pinochet's reign in Chile, the village was used to kind of capture and torture and house people. So it was sort of a concentration camp. And in 1973, the artist, her own dad was abducted and held prisoner in Pisagua before being eventually exiled to Europe. So yeah, it's quite a sad history. I think up until now there are lots of graves and bodies still being found in the village. So this work then, I don't think the artist has ever been to Chile, but this work's a sort of a soft kind of monument that she's made to honor her father, to honor her family's history. And also, as I said, in Chile, there's not been a lot of acknowledgement by the national body about all of those crimes committed. So this forms a sort of collective memory for the artist as well. And you can see in the time, as I said, the time that it takes to make a work like this. It does allow you to kind of reflect on these processes of like repair and grief, and how that can kind of be an endless, like, time-consuming task that is actually obviously ultimately very worth it. So this is Mirror States. If you can see, it is a projection room with two sort of medium-sized projections that are sitting by the corner of the room. So the projections kind of mirror each other, so they sit like this. And the seats are arranged so that you can kind of watch both at the same time. The soundscape is really important to this work as well, so there are two speakers, and the sound travels, and by the sound traveling, it kind of allows you to pull your attention to the two different screens. So this work was made by the artist Caroline Mac Cathmhaoil. So it consists of images shot by Caroline on a visit to Cuba in 2022. And while in Cuba, Caroline found that in the country there are all of these amazing statues and plazas of these revolutionary leaders. And historically, Cuba and Ireland were put into comparison. So in the early 19th century, Ireland was called the Cuba of the West. Che Guevara, or Che Guevara Lynch, has Irish ancestry. And Eamon de Valera has Cuban ancestry. So there's this kind of exchange of revolutionary leaders. And there was a point in time where they both shared socialist dreams. But yeah, I think Caroline found that in Ireland, a lot of the revolutionary leaders here were kind of, they had a lot smaller statues. Their statues were on side streets, kind of hidden by huge buildings or traffic. And it felt almost as if Ireland had forgotten its revolutionary history. So what she has done is she's put these two islands into close relation to kind of see what they can learn from each other, to revive this history as well. The film is kind of concluded by these comparisons between Shannon Airport and Guantanamo Bay. So as we know, Shannon Airport is used as an outpost by the US military, and Guantanamo Bay is also an outpost used by the US military on the west coast of Cuba. Yeah, I guess that's the end of it. I think this work is really interesting because I guess it recalls a sort of, I guess, potential history or a specific time in history that we seem to have almost forgotten. And I think it pulls us to this place where we have to kind of remember sort of the radical or revolutionary potential that existed here in the country, and sort of remember what's possible, because obviously we're in a time now where it doesn't feel like there is much possible. So I think this comparison with Cuba, who's gone in a completely different direction, is really, really useful for, I guess, our own political thinking now. And I think also maybe, I guess throughout the festival there's a lot of encouragement to kind of disrupt the logic-making apparatus that we use. And I think, sorry, I'm distracted by the film. But yeah, I guess drawing from history allows us to think about what's possible, what we're doing now, and where we might go. So this is a really, really brilliant film. I think that is entirely it for this location. On the 13th, there will also be a tour of the Art Centre as well. Thank you.